Welcome to this edition of 21 Wire Live. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. Thank you so much for joining us for this live stream. We've got a very special guest for you today. We're going to be joined by him in a minute, but I just want to remind everybody we're broadcasting live on YouTube, also on our Facebook page, 21stcenturywire.com, and also on Periscope via Twitter on our Twitter account, which is 21st Century Wire Twitter. You can also watch it on @21Wire. On Twitter as well. Now, our next guest, very special guest, is the director of the Ron Paul Institute. He's going to be talking to us about the current political upheaval, there's no other way to describe it, in America right now. And he's joining me on the live link, and his name is Daniel McAdams. Hello, Daniel.
Hey, Patrick, how are you?
I'm great. It's great to see you. And also, well, we've got a lot to talk about today. But just before we start, for those people who aren't familiar with you, familiar with what you do and the organization that you work for, if you give us a little bit of a brief synopsis about yourself and the work you're doing at the Ron Paul Institute.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I've been the executive director of the Ron Paul Institute since we started in 2013. I'm also the co-host of the daily Ron Paul Liberty Report, which is still on YouTube as of today, as of last time I checked. But the daily news and analysis program, similar to yours in perspective and style. So before that, I worked for Dr. Paul on Capitol Hill in his congressional office for, I think, 12 years or something like this. So I've been with Dr. Paul for a while.
So we'll get straight into it, and there's a lot to unpack, really, especially since what's happened on January 6th, the protests stroke riots on Capitol Hill. And I know you've spent quite a few years of your life either covering or working on Capitol Hill with Congressman Ron Paul. What were your first thoughts and reactions with seeing that? I mean, you've seen protests in D.C. before, but there was a lot of strange things going on that day with the D.C. Capitol Police. There's also a huge political cloud over everything really since the election. To do with the contesting, the challenging of the election, and the certification, which was going on that day. How do you think this unfolded? Do you think this was in any way misconstrued by the media? This sort of the timeline of events. Speaking from your understanding of what goes on in D.C.
No, Patrick, they wouldn't do that, would they? Hey, I mean, it becomes sort of an epistemological question, right? It seems like everything is a psyop, like literally everything in our lives is a psyop. And this certainly had the feel of one. And yes, I've been in the house when we were, quote, occupied. We had our offices occupied, and we had people beating on drums and things outside of our doors while we were trying to work. And frankly, it's not a big deal. I didn't see every second of video of what happened on January 6th. I'll preface it by saying that. I saw a few things. I saw some people acting up and misbehaving. I didn't see wholesale damage. It didn't look like Seattle or Portland when Antifa was done with it, that's for sure. We saw some people that were allowed in. And those people, strangely enough, some of those people are being charged with crimes, even though they simply walked into an open door in the Capitol. I was talking to my colleague, Adam, who I also worked with in Dr. Paul's office and works with us at the Ron Paul Institute. We were sort of speculating, hey, if we had been there and the door was open, we probably would have walked in and looked around too. What's going on? And here you find yourself charged with a crime. So it is very strange. There were strange things going on. There were people there that seem to have had affiliations with other organizations. We know this. We know the guy with the horns on his head was involved in things that were not sort of Trump organizations. We know other people. The one fellow that was egging people on was, I think, affiliated with the Black Lives Matter group in Utah. So we don't know if it was a cook-up. We don't know if it was a part cook-up. But what I think we can say, and Patrick, you and I have studied this for a long time. We've studied color revolutions. We studied regime change. We've studied coups overseas for a long time. The one thing that I can say, for watching this for probably 25 or 30 years, if this was a coup, it was the most harebrained, goofy coup I've ever seen in my life. In other words, it wasn't a coup. It was some people who went in there. Maybe a few of them did some things that they shouldn't. Of course, anyone who commits violence should be condemned and should be prosecuted. But it's a long way of saying the media is playing this as something that literally it was not. And Patrick, the proof is in the pudding, because the people that are being charged are not being charged with treason. They're not being charged with incitement. They're not being charged with overthrowing the country. They're being charged with trespassing and damaging property and that sort of thing.
So the fallout from that, I mean, immediately you saw how the talking points were formulated. It was insurrection, sedition, which interesting term to use for that event. I mean, you spoke to this just earlier now, but in a coup d'état, very hyperbolic. I mean, the hyperbole. It seems the hysteria, the hyperbole. This seems to be the norm right now, not just with this issue, but we could talk about COVID as well, very hyperbolic, and everything really during the Trump administration, right back to RussiaGate, and it seems to. I thought things were going to get better, Daniel, after Trump lost. I thought at least they might calm down, but what we're seeing is kind of the opposite. They seem to be ratcheting it up and really pushing for full spectrum dominance politically. I mean, what are your thoughts on how this is increasing right now?
Well, the worst thing to happen to these people is that they lost their enemy. They lost the horrible orange man. And that's the sort of their whole raison d'etre. So without him there, what do? They turn the guns inward toward the rest of us. But, on this topic of coup and on the hyperbole, and that's a perfect word to use, it almost seems like they needed to have this to justify what was coming. So regardless, this was already baked into the cake, regardless of what was going to happen. But, even a bad coup, even a stupid coup, even a goofy coup, it does have certain components that this absolutely and utterly lacked. What was the ideology? What was the intention? What moves did they take toward that intention? Did they try to take over radio or TV? Did they try to broadcast from the Senate chamber? We are the government now. I'm President Buffalo Head. There was nothing, even an objective person who understands what a coup and insurrection is. There were no components of a coup in what they did. Just doesn't justify, and I'm not trying to justify what happened, but I'm saying simply as someone who understands the components of a coup, it wasn't there.
And things increased a little bit even beyond that. Domestic terrorism, very, very quickly, that sort of line started rolling out. And they're talking about this, this was a domestic 9/11. And I know it sounds ridiculous. And, from a critical, skeptical, level-headed political person would look at this and they know quite rightly this is crazed hysteria in hyperbole. But I thought RussiaGate was too, and yet half the country it permeated, and people believe that official narrative, conspiracy theory, if you will, and this one it in a way kind of buries RussiaGate. In a way, it's almost like they're trying to get off the hook for 5 years of was effectively the biggest political hoax, really in U.S. history. Now it's domestic terrorism. Daniel, fascism is also being bandied around. I what policy did Donald Trump have during his 4 years that was fascist? It's hard to find exactly how that fits. But having 30,000 troops on the streets in D.C. for an inauguration, deplatforming, censoring, drawing up blacklists, that seems to be fascist behavior in a lot of people's books. I mean, speak to this new line of attack.
Well, what's funny is the actual definition of fascism, the actual fascism, the term, though you could see plenty of it in Trump's administration, the relationship with the military-industrial complex, his trade policy, his closeness and tightness with companies. But of course, that's not what they mean when they say fascism. They mean that he is out there with sort of having a Nuremberg rally, whereas in fact, kind of the inauguration looked a little bit like a Nuremberg rally. 8 million flags and the lights going up, and not a single person allowed. So it really found them. But I think, the first part of your question, I actually think that the turning inward of the guns. I think the RussiaGate set the stage, and I think what we're seeing now is the culmination of 5 years of RussiaGate. You establish the fact that there are a whole group of people out there who don't have a different political perspective, who don't follow a person who you may personally find repulsive, but are actually in the service of a foreign power and enemies of the United States. It's very McCarthyite, as I'm sure you'd agree. But the culmination of that then is to turn the guns in toward them. And they're not just people in the service of Putin. They are actually physically violent people who will kill you if they get the chance. And this is what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said, and talk about hyperbole.
Hmm.
She was afraid that some of her Republican colleagues would turn her over to the mob to be killed. Come on, it's just such a joke. But you're right. The dead enders believe it. Hillary Clinton tweeted the other day that she wonders if Trump was talking to Putin while they were sacking the Capitol. So she still believes this 5, 6, 7-year-old conspiracy theory as well.
Yeah, and she's the progenitor, largely the progenitor of that, according to some of the declassified and the leaked memo, et cetera, with the FBI. But the core issue, and I don't see this conversation happening, Daniel, and I want to get your comment on it. Why were the protesters there on the 6th? I mean, put aside that there was possibly a stand down order with Capitol Police. The National Guard weren't allowed to mobilize. That's come out possibly for political reasons in the Pentagon. That's come out in the Washington Post just this morning. So there's a lot of that. But put that aside, there was definitely a feeling by Trump supporters, by Republican voters nationwide, that somehow the election itself wasn't fair, or there were massive irregularities. I don't know if I can say election fraud on YouTube.
Don't you
We
dare.
might get the channel pulled down. that speaks to our topic of conversation today as well. We'll get to censorship in a minute, but no one wants to address that core question, because isn't that a really important fundamental part of the democracy, the constitutional republic? If you don't have faith in the electoral system, then if that's not addressed and not given a fair hearing, and I believe that's what Senators Cruz and Hawley were attempting to get, a 10-day audit, an investigation for a 10-day audit, to have something on the record, because cases weren't being allowed to be heard in court possibly for political reasons. But the media seems to want to avoid this and rush to the fascist insurrection narrative and not talk about the causes of it. But go ahead.
Well, the new media message is shut up. That's basically what it is. Oh, Hunter Biden, we found a laptop. Should we look into it? No, shut up. You can't even publish about it. Oh, we found Swalwell in bed with some potentially Chinese spy. Shut up. We're not going to talk about it. In fact, let's make him one of the impeachment managers, just to put it in your face. The election looks a little bit fishy. Maybe there are some things about it that we should think about. Certainly in 2016, there were plenty of Democrats saying there was a lot of fraud going on and Hillary actually won. Well, that was okay back then. But if you say it now, shut up. You're potentially a domestic terrorist. And in fact, Patrick, we talked about this before we went live, but literally a few minutes before we started this program, the Department of Homeland Security, we haven't heard much from them in a while. They issued a National Terrorism Advisory System Bulletin. It's the first time they've done this in a while. And in fact, they previously had done this about foreign terrorist threats in the U.S. I don't want to take too much time going over it, but it was really interesting because it talks about some ideologically motivated violent extremists with objections to the exercise of government authority, and the presidential transition, as well as other perceived grievances. This is interesting how they word this. Fueled by false narratives, could continue to mobilize and incite. So if they do believe there's something wrong with the election, they're fueled by false narratives and potentially terrorists. And it goes on to talk about domestic violent extremists are motivated by a range of issues, including anger over COVID-19 restrictions, the 2020 election results, the police use of force, etc. And it says they could be inspired by foreign terror groups. So if you're pissed off over the fact that your country's been shut down for the past year and you've lost your job and you can't go outside without a mask, you actually may be not a pissed off person, but a domestic violent terrorist.
So that's pretty much all dissent, really, on that list. So, the broad brush. To say broad brush, Daniel, this is beyond a broad brush. I mean, where are we at politically here? And is this, the way I look at it, Daniel, is possibly this is really, when you drill down to it, it's about centralized power, maybe federal power, versus everybody, really, the states, individuals, a political opposition, The only difference is that there seems to be a real effort for one party dominance now. I've never heard rhetoric like this in my life. I don't know if you have, but uh, go ahead.
No, no, you're right. I mean, I wasn't, of course, alive in the McCarthy era, as old as I may look, but I can imagine it must have felt like that back then. Certainly, when I was, a youngster in the '80s, it was the end of the Soviet era, but certainly there was some of that, but not to this level, not to this idea. Of course, anyone who uses violence, certainly, it's already against the law. You already go to jail for it. But interesting about this Homeland Security alert. It says although we don't have any information about anything specific, but let us generalize and say people out there that are like the COVID restrictions, who don't like the elections, who are just ticked off over a bunch of stuff. Well, and it also has all of this stuff that we remember from the Obama and the Bush era. If you see something, say something. Turn in your neighbors. There's a big notice on the bottom. Turn people in. Call us up. So it really is. It really is very, very chilling.
I've heard a lot of commentators on CNN, MSNBC, they're equating MAGA supporters, Trump supporters to Al Qaeda, ISIS. Trump is there, Osama bin Laden, I believe one. I think that was Juliette Kayyem, former DHS official in the Obama administration, a CNN national security expert, but absolutely ridiculous. But this is demonizing the opposition, marginalizing the opposition. Really, what's the goal here? Is it to disenfranchise the opposition, to full spectrum dominance politically?
Or is the motivation to get them to do something violent? And maybe that's a conspiracy theory, but there is nothing that would benefit this administration's intentions to consolidate power more than an actual January 6th, and people actually doing something that's more important than putting their feet on Nancy Pelosi's desk. So in a way, I mean, this reminds me a little bit, and you suggested this before we started talking, but it reminds me of the Shevardnadze era in Georgia. And I lived overseas and I did elections over there, election monitoring. But every few months, toward the end of Shevardnadze's reign, when people were really getting ticked off at the corruption and the tyranny, every few months he staged an assassination attempt. And it was almost comical. All the pyrotechnics in his car almost blew up. And he was able to get out there and arrest a few of the usual suspects and put them away. It sort of reminds you of this. They need this violence, to continue ramping up against people and not only demonizing them, keeping them out of the real and virtual public square, but literally, physically keeping them out of the square and putting them off, to Guantanamo somewhere.
Yeah, so the Eastern Europe, you spent time in Eastern Europe as well. So a one-party state where the one party has full control of, let's say, the media and the public square. And I know when you were in Europe, it was before social media, so the public square was literally the physical public square. And now you have a situation in the United States where one party, in a way, also controls the social media public square. That's where everybody is having their discourse. This is where debate happens, where political activism, campaigning happens, and it's now becoming very tightly regulated. I'm talking about Facebook, Twitter. You've had your experiences with Twitter as well, and all these other platforms as well. YouTube, obviously, a lot of censorship going on. If you even mention or question the election results in any way, that's somehow against their terms of services. And the Ron Paul Institute has been censored and attacked for, basically reporting op-eds, things like this. So do you think this portends to some transition in the U.S. politically? I mean, based on your knowledge of history.
Yeah, I think, the problem that a lot of conservatives in the US have is they think that this is somehow some kind of liberal plot against conservatives, and as usual, they get it wrong. It's not a liberal plot against conservatives, although conservatives often find themselves deplatformed. What this is a plot, if you want to call it that, a plot by the elites to radically narrow the acceptable level of discussion, the acceptable framework of discussion, the limits of discussion. And this affects progressives probably as much or nearly as much as conservatives. Certainly affects libertarians, people who doubt the value of the state. So the conservatives, of course, as usual, they misdiagnose the problem, but it is a big problem. And you open by referencing Central and Eastern Europe. The real success of communism, we're seeing it sort of in, and this could be completely wrong. This is an observation that someone else made on Twitter, but there were a lot of people who were censored on Facebook, and including the Ron Paul Institute and Ron Paul, who, when they challenged it, said, "Oh, sorry, it was a mistake." And that's perfectly acceptable. That may be a mistake. Who knows what kind of robots and whatever are looking at it rather than real people? Perfectly possible. But someone speculated that this is sort of a conditioning thing. That once you've said something and getting taken down, and they say, "Well, it's a mistake," you might actually start moderating or tempering or thinking twice about posting or doing something. And quite frankly, it affects me as well. Nobody wants to lose the audience. So the real success of communism in terms of destroying any opposition to it, at least until 60s or 70s, was self-censorship. You don't need to have a guy with a gun in your apartment making sure you don't tell your wife how much you hate the party, because you get people to censor themselves. It's much more convenient. It's much easier to do. And I think that's the goal, this restriction of political discourse, self-censorship, get people to stop talking about it. And frankly, in Eastern Europe, what it resulted in was a massive increase in alcoholism and depression and suicide. Well, let's look at the statistics in the United States this past year. They've all shot up, up, up.
And I want to take the liberty of pointing out an article that was actually, it's on the Ron Paul Institute's website. We'll take a look at that. This was by John Whitehead, which you published recently. The headline is Enemies of the Deep State, the Government's War on Domestic Terrorism is a Trap. And in this piece, a very good article, I encourage people to go to the Ron Paul Institute's website and then read this. But there's a quote here by Tulsi Gabbard, former congressman, Democrat congressman from Hawaii. And this is what she has to say. I believe this was also a statement she made with Brian Kilmeade on Fox News recently. She said, "This is an issue that all Democrats, Republicans, independents, libertarians should be extremely concerned about, especially because we don't have to guess about where this goes or how it ends." And she continues on this point. What characteristics are we looking for as we are building the profile of a potential, quote, extremist? What are we talking about? Religious extremists? Are we talking about Christians, evangelical Christians? What is a religious extremist? Is it somebody who is, quote, pro-life? And, we talked to now some people in the mainstream media would say that's hyperbolic, Daniel, for her to be making that point. But I think that's a perfectly legitimate concern that she shares probably with quite millions of Americans right now. But just your thoughts on this.
I mean, it's really great to see someone like Tulsi Gabbard come out, and she's talk about someone. I think she was ripped off by her own party, but she's withstood a lot of slings and arrows because she takes it from both sides. But I would consider. I mean, I don't know. She doesn't fit into a neat, sort of box, but I would sort of consider her progressive libertarian-ish. Certainly defending speech that she probably doesn't agree with. But she was great on Fox. She was on the show you mentioned. She was on with Tucker Carlson. And she pointed out this inflammatory statement made by former CIA director and chief cook-upper of the Russiagate scam, John Brennan, talking about how the incoming administration, including the intelligence community, is moving like a laser against these groups. And you might want to explain. Oh, you probably have a quote there, Patrick, that's more detail about what she said.
Yeah, well, I don't have that particular quote to hand, but I am familiar with that. That's the former CIA director.
Yeah.
He's not alone, by the way. There's just some outrageous things being said. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with this publication or not, Daniel, but this is Bill Kristol's The Bulwark. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
and there's just some really crazy rhetoric. This is the headline here: the GOP's pre-fascist DNA. And the author here, this is very much a neocon website. It's dark money funded, lobbyist
Yeah.
funded. So he's saying that the GOP is naturally predisposed to, quote, fascism. And really is attacking Josh Hawley. And here's one quote. I mean, there's so much in this, but this says, social science suggests that the majority of Trump voters are instinctive authoritarians, but one cannot separate Trumpism from the inherent character of the party which spawned him. This is the most tame thing in this article here, Daniel, because I didn't want to go too overboard with it, but this is I'm seeing so much of this. It's like a full court press right across the board.
Well, what's hilarious about that, Patrick, is unless I'm got amnesia or I'm high or something, we spent the last 4 years with the Democrats and the left saying, you better listen to the intelligence community. All 17 agencies of the intelligence community have concluded, listen to the FBI, trust the FBI. And now all of a sudden it's the Republican Party who has authoritarian tendencies or followers of Trump. We would probably say that both parties have authoritarian tendencies, and both parties agree on more than they disagree. This is about power, raw power, and the exercise of raw power more than any ideological difference. They both love authority. They both crave authority because what they like more than anything, Patrick, is to put their boot in the faces of the rest of us, especially those of us who will not comply.
I'm glad you used the word power, Daniel, because that's a really good segue to where I wanted to go. This word power, I'm hearing it so much more often now than I would have, 10, 20, 30 years ago. The peaceful transition of power, we're taking power, Biden's assuming power. Maybe I'm getting my history wrong, but this wasn't always the tone, let's say, of politics in America. It's as if all the power is centralized at the executive or at the federal government, and that's all that matters, really. But I mean, have you noticed this as well? And that does harken back to kind of Soviet style language,
The
Lenin and
exercise,
Trotsky.
yeah, the exercise of power, exactly. And as you know, I'm not a Trump voter. I'm objective. I think voting is not the greatest use of time or resources. But what a dope Trump was when he took over, when he got power. What did he do? He left all these idiotic retreads from the Obama administration in the second and third tier of all these agencies in the administration, and then he's shocked that they worked against him from day one to undermine him and destroy him. This is something that I'll tell you that Biden understands and Obama understood, and more importantly, the people around them who may or may not be actually pulling the strings, because I don't know how many strings Biden has to pull. These are the people who understand power, and they hit the ground running. I would bet that there is not a single Trump ambassador, to Burkina Faso or somewhere you can't even find, who wasn't given a pink slip the second the transition took place. So these people understand how to wield power. They understand it very well, and they're damn well going to wield it.
So we've gone from just in a month, we've gone from double standards to now community standards with social media censorship. We've gone from deplatforming to deprogramming. I'm hearing this word deprogramming in the media. Trump supporters need to be hunted down. They need to be questioned. The military needs to be purged as well. And so this the accusations of fascism seem to be coming from the in classic Leninist style, coming
Yeah.
from the accuser himself. But that's pretty shocking. I mean, have we ever seen anything like that? Military purges?
Military purges, deprogramming it. Really, you're right. I mean, you hit on Lenin. I mean, it's absolutely especially the early part of the Soviet Union. The initial period, the Lenin period up till 24. I mean, you have this sort of, every Trump supporter is in a cult, and actually not only in a cult but has mental illness. So people that are in a cult, that are programmed, it's a kind of form of mental illness. So you have to be sent to a re-education camp. Certainly was back then. And here they're calling for the same thing now. Send these people to re-education camps. Now, there are a lot of things that Trump supporters believe that I think are pretty dumb and pretty wacky. But the idea that they have a mental illness, some of them probably do. Anyone addicted to politics, I think to a degree, has mental illness. But the whole idea that you take your enemies and you camp them, you put them in a camp, you give them, psychiatric treatment. This is something from some pretty dark periods of history from both the commies and the Nazis. And do we really want to go back to that?
Yeah, they're really taking a leaf out of the Soviet. I mean, people from the Soviet Union that I know. I was speaking to a Russian journalist based in Moscow, Dmitry Babich,
Yeah.
and he grew up in this period. And he said, "This is exactly, this is exactly. You know, you get attacked, demoralized. They say there's something wrong with you. You're mentally ill if you protest against anything that the government or the party's doing." So that was par for the course growing up for him in the '70s and '80s in Soviet Union and Russia, and now they're kind of shocked to see this going on in the U.S. and saying, "Don't you guys read your history books?" Um,
Yeah.
but luckily, there does seem to be. I don't know how significant this is, Daniel. You might be able to comment, but some of the more traditionally left wing uh, advocacy groups, civil liberties groups have pushed back. This is the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, and they drafted a letter which is interesting. They're basically saying that these new powers, new statutes for domestic terrorism should not be granted to the government, that they already have things on the books to deal with this. That's an argument that you made early on in this segment here. And this is really a collection. This is the full Rainbow Coalition here. The Arab American Institute, Bend the Arc, Jewish Action, Muslim Advocates, the NAACP, Legal Defense Fund. They've all signed on basically saying that if there's 50 federal statutes already in existence to investigate and prosecute individuals who participated in, of course, they're calling it an insurrection here, so they're still using the word. But I even think one of the members of the squad, Rashida Tlaib, she's against it as well. So do you think there's going to be possibly some, pushback from the left, the old left, if it's still around?
And progressives, the Glenn Greenwald has been, terrific on this, as have people like Matt Taibbi and others. So I think we have some allies, probably more than we had during the Trump era, who are concerned about this, and I think that's a good thing, and I hope it's something we can build on. But I wanted to mention something that you ended with before you made that last point about the Soviet Union. What's interesting is one of my greatest friends. He was in Hungary, and he escaped Hungary in 1956, and he was not allowed to go to university because his father had a title under the previous monarch, so he was not allowed to go to university. And you probably follow Jonathan Turley, who I think is terrific when it comes to First Amendment and many other things. But Turley's written several things about universities, Harvard University, other universities, who want to actually take away your degree if you were a Trump supporter, or kick you out if you're a Trump supporter. So as extreme as I always viewed it, that my friend was not allowed to go to school because his dad was a kulak. Now I find that these same people are calling for the same thing here. And unfortunately, Patrick, I don't think Americans know history very well. Too many of them go to public school, maybe, but wow, I mean, I guess that the Santana, if you're condemned to repeat it, I guess that's where we are.
Yeah, that's pretty disturbing. I think someone made the comment, if they're going to strip Ted Cruz's Harvard degree, then they want to give him his tuition back as well,
Yeah,
plus
exactly.
interest from the student loans. Um,
Exactly.
so turnabout's fair play there.
Yeah.
But Arnold Schwarzenegger, I mean, this was probably the most outrageous thing I heard. He compared the events of January 6th to the 1938, the Kristallnacht, where the Germans attacked Jewish communities and destroyed their property in this. And and again, Dmitry Babich from Moscow made the comment to this Schwarzenegger statement. He said the Kristallnacht, you don't have to look any further than what happened in Kiev in February of 2014. I mean,
Literally.
yeah. So I mean, he's supposed to be a conservative, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Not that he's a major political figure, but that comment is just typical of how over the top things are right now.
I just wonder if he's getting up there in years. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he was watching video from Portland where Antifa went in and burned up the black neighborhoods, and ruined black-owned businesses. Maybe that was more like the Kristallnacht than some dude putting his feet up on Pelosi's chair, or maybe stealing a podium or something. So maybe he was just a little bit confused over there. Too many steroids or something.
Yeah, too many cigars, I think. So the other thing I wanted to get your comment on, and this is really important, the way the language is being handled. We're hearing the term nationalism has been expanded to white nationalism, and used ubiquitously in media and mainstream liberal discourse. And then that's been attached to white supremacy. So you've gone from nationalism to white supremacy, and then add racism on top of that salad for as a bit of Tabasco sauce.
Yeah.
And really it's demonizing nationalism. So my question, Daniel, is that to not just to attack the political opposition, but any policies that are nationalist policies? Because definitely you could say that a lot of the Trump policies were, quote, nationalist in nature, and nationalism is a real worldview versus, let's say, globalism. That's a real conversation that's happening in the world, but it's
Yeah.
being kind of given the Nazi branding by the media right now. But what do you think about this?
Yeah, the whole evolution or devolution, I guess, to the whole thing into white nationalism is dangerous and scary. I mean, how many white nationalists do we really have? I mean, how many do we know? We just found out today that the leader of Proud Boys was actually a police informant. Probably stirring them up. I just don't see it. But the problem is, and this is going back to Lenin: the worse, the better. The problem is there aren't really any white nationalists. There aren't any white racists in the U.S. that are really dangerous in any way, other than some goofy guy who knows sitting in front of his computer. So you have to sort of, I think, develop these if you want to be, if you want to look at it that way. And I think some of the things we're seeing from the early part of the Biden administration, where he talked about our exclusive focus is going to be on whatever it is, will develop sort of some negative attitudes. And I think that's just what they want. But this conflation of nationalism, which is a word, it is an unpleasant word in some ways, with white nationalism. Really, I think you're right. I don't think it's an accident. I think people, have nationalistic feeling. I certainly disagreed with Trump's pursuit of nationalism and trade policy and other things. I think it's sort of an empty sloganistic, but I think it is very convenient to take those steps over so you can more easily demonize people.
Yeah, and we did hear similar rhetoric, funny enough, very similar out of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, and other these globalist luminaries, let's say, they're, decrying this as a problem and America's too inward looking. I mean, you've had a lot of accusations of Ron Paul over the years. His non-interventionist stance has always been characterized in the mainstream media as isolationist, and that's somehow akin to nationalism. You've seen this before, and it seems like in that case it was definitely they were attacking the policy, because if you're not interventionist, then you're not, you're not going to help grow the military-industrial complex or control markets overseas. But so you have experience in this realm, actually.
Yeah, it's true, and unfortunately, the name is escaping me now. But there was a famous time when Dr. Paul was on television. I forget if it was CNN or what have you. But I think the debate was whether or not we need to go into Iraq, and the fact that Dr. Paul was opposed to Iraq and is opposed to all interventions. He was accused by, it was actually a right winger this time, and you'll remember who it is. Actually, the guy who played in Ferris Bueller, the famous right wing guy, but he accused Dr. Paul of being anti-Semitic for not wanting to go into Iraq. And so there is those accusations that maybe it's a misinterpretation, maybe it's purposeful, that non-interventionists somehow have evil motives. But of course, the right wingers hated non-interventionists because it takes away their ability to invade in other countries, and the left wingers, the humanitarian interventionists, hate them because it takes away their ability to go reshape societies as they wish. So we get it coming and going.
And just to round things off a little bit, what are your thoughts right now about this new administration? I mean, this is a separate topic, but it is related. Rand Paul made a stand on the floor today. A point of order. It was defeated, but in terms of the impeachment in the Senate, but he did have 45 senators that agreed with him that the impeachment after the fact, as it were, of President Trump would be unconstitutional. So if you take those as solid votes of support, there's not going to be the number of votes required to convict the president afterwards. I mean, how do you think of this circus right now, the second impeachment after he's left office?
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable, isn't it? What I think is happening is I think some senators are pushing the panic button, especially Democrat senators. Right now, they realize they don't have the votes. They don't have anything near the votes. The last thing they want to see is this trial drag on for weeks and weeks, and with no outcome. So this is another example of Pelosi and crew, who, of course, didn't have any witnesses this time around. It was a snap impeachment, really getting way far ahead of reality. And now, basically, I mean, what I see happening is the Democrat senators being hung out to dry, with America saying, what the heck are you doing? Not understanding that the real goal of this second impeachment is to have a conviction and to bar the president from ever, or ex-president, of course, from ever holding office again, which is in the Constitution. And Jonathan Turley makes a point much better than I could, because he's a professor of constitutional law. But the framers, when they put these two together, explaining how impeachment works, the preventing, the barring from future office was not on an equal level with removal from office. It was a subset, because it was clear when it said that senators also, after they remove from office, they also may wish to bar from future office. So that means it's a subset of the original. The Democrats wanted to put the two of them together as equals, saying, okay, he's out of office, that's fine. But if we convict, we automatically get this second one, which is to bar him from future office, which is what I think they really want. I think we had a show yesterday. It was Dr. Paul came up with the part of the title that said, when is the backfire coming? And I think that's what's going to happen pretty soon.
I mean, wouldn't it, to have a proper impeachment trial in the Senate, wouldn't you need Chief Justice John Roberts presiding over it? Is that going to happen or not?
And Robert said, he's not president anymore. You know, what are you guys high? I'm not, I'm not going to do this. It's pretty funny. So you have poor old Leahy. Here he is. He's not a young man. In fact, last night he had to go to the hospital. He's probably panicking about this whole ridiculous thing. He probably pulled the shortest straw. But here he is. They're going to have Leahy in its place. The whole thing is literally falling apart. It's collapsing. It's going to end up being a laughing stock. And who knows what may happen in 2 years in midterm elections.
I mean, beyond keeping Trump from running for office again, as you said, do you think there's also a wider motivation, which is they want to destroy the memory of Donald Trump? They want to crush Trumpism. And in a way, again, they've done nothing really. I'm talking about the Democrats, who have been in control of the House for the last 4 years. They haven't done anything but really go after Trump. So they haven't really advanced any domestic policies of note. They haven't debated or argued or raised any major points of debate and discussion on anything. But so are they stuck in a kind of anti-Trump mode? And that's 4 years is a long time, Daniel. It becomes muscle memory politically. What do you think?
Yeah. That's a great word. That's a great word. That's absolutely right. It becomes muscle memory. And so they're now incapable of talking about policies. And we were hoping they'd come with us on some of the things we criticized Trump for in terms of his policy. But no, they wanted to talk about his fascism, his orange hair, his wife sounds awfully foreign, all of these particularly ridiculously inane things, rather than his real policy failures and real boneheaded moves. So yeah, that's exactly it. Muscle memory. Now they don't know what the heck to do.
And do you think that the Biden administration is going to continue being hawkish with Russia? Certainly, that's what it sort of looks like. But yet they're wanting to get back into long-term agreements like the START Treaty, missile treaties, and so forth. But still wanting to have a kind of aggressive front, against Russia. Is there any chance that they could reset relations with Russia?
Well, they're all Obama retreads. Let's not forget that. So basically, this is Obama 2.0 or 3.0, I guess, the third term of Obama when it comes to U.S. foreign policy. But I don't think they have the leeway that the Obama administration had to do things overseas. And I forget who it was. We put up a piece on Iran today. But what's he going to do in Iran? Iran is very clear. We are not going to go back and renegotiate the JCPOA. We're not going to give up ballistic missiles, retroactively. We're not going to do this. We're not going to change the terms. So what do they do? Is Russia going to sit by while the U.S. Invades Syria or starts arming jihadists again? I have a hard time understanding that they would do that. Are they going to put more troops in Afghanistan? So I think they are itching. They're eager. They want to flex their muscles. But I don't know. The world has changed a lot since the Obama administration. It really has. And sort of the mask has come off U.S. foreign policy. We're not here to liberate you. We're here to burn down and blow up your country. And so I just don't see. I don't see the landscape for a Obama 3.0 foreign policy. I think they're going to try, but I don't think it's going to turn out how they expect.
Do you think there's also a competency deficit, a little overconfident, maybe overestimating the achievements of people like Michael McFaul, Victoria Nuland? I mean, I wouldn't call that a success. The dismemberment of the Ukraine into three parts. It's been a disaster for the Ukrainians, and really the U.S., the Obama administration was the driving force behind all that. And so, but they're still being cycled back in, Daniel. So Samantha Power, Susan Rice, a lot of the same characters you'll see in the administration, they are vaunted as kind of real luminaries in D.C. The adults in the room, as the media are calling them right now, looking after us, the kids. But
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's. I don't know. I'm a believer that responsibility to protect is a kind of it's become an inbred political ideology. It's really neoconservatism rebranded.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's not seen to work, but they haven't come up with anything or made any speeches or said anything that seems any different. Are we going to see a reboot of the kind of Obama Clinton doctrine?
Yeah, I mean, R2P is a relatively new doctrine. It's what 2005 or 2006, I think it was. So it's relatively new, and unfortunately, the UN, for all of its faults, was designed to be a forum of nations, of countries, of states. R2P really, more than anything else, undermined that and said, well, you actually lose your sovereignty as a state if enough people with enough influence can bribe or do whatever they wish to say that you've done it. And they did it with Libya. They said what he's done, the atrocities are so bad, he's lost his ability. Libya has lost its status as a sovereign state. Very, very, very dangerous stuff. But what have these people left in their wake? They basically left the world a series of gaping open wounds, bleeding open wounds. What problem have they solved? You're right about Ukraine. We don't talk about it a lot, but is it solved? Is it fixed? No. Is Libya fixed? No. Is Syria fixed? Is the whole ridiculous cook-up called Arab Spring, is that fixed? That was Hillary's plan. That was a big soft power plan. Arab Spring, we're going to bring democracy. Is it fixed? No, it's an open wound. And that's all they can do. Just like the neocons, who are their ideological cousins, all they can do is destroy. They cannot build. They don't have the capacity to build because it's impossible. It's impossible to reshape other societies that you don't even understand. It's so ridiculously hubristic.
Yeah, I could say the same domestically about it's easier to tear things down instead of building things. I don't want to point out any fingers there, but we're also seeing that domestically. The last thing, we'll wrap it up. It's been a great discussion, Daniel. And what your message is at the Ron Paul Institute, what Dr. Paul's mission has been for a long time is the message of liberty, of self-responsibility. Those things, looking at the cycles of politics and the current trajectory of where we're at now in America, and really when Ron Paul's message blossomed was when some of these tumultuous things were happening, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Do you think this is also an opportunity to reboot your message at the Ron Paul Institute?
Absolutely. And as depressed as I may feel over these crackdowns that we've discussed over the past hour, maybe I'll swig down a whiskey bottle after this conversation because it is a little bit depressing. But as upsetting as that is, I do feel a great sense of optimism that this is a great opportunity for us to present the message that a peaceful foreign policy, a non-interventionist domestic policy, respect, the golden rule, government shouldn't be allowed to do what it forbids the population from doing, all of these things, and how they bring prosperity, moral and physical prosperity to a society. We have a tremendous opportunity to make that case. And as Dr. Paul often says, we're only hobbled by the fact that we are flawed as communicators. We have our flaws, and it's going to be difficult because we have literally all the power that's out there against us. But still, we are optimistic because it is right, Patrick. It is a great opportunity to make the case for non-interventionism, peace, and prosperity.
And also things like free speech and free press. These are becoming big issues. I know you've advocated on this over the years, really strongly campaigned for it as well. So this is just going to be more and more relevant now in terms of the U.S. conversation. So anyway, I want to applaud you and Dr. Paul and the work that you're doing at the Institute. And yeah, I hope we're going to hear more from you. You guys have been right. I'm going to say this. I went back and looked at some of the fact checkers like PolitiFact, how they attacked you and Dr. Paul early on in the year with the COVID crisis, attacking for things that have actually turned out to be true, but they haven't gone back to correct the fact check articles. Daniel, this is the problem. They just sit there on the internet, despite the evidence that has changed as well. So the fact checkers, that's another conversation altogether. But thank you very much. And also want to direct people to the Ron Paul Institute, your website as well. Some great articles. And is your daily show or your news program, is it going still live on YouTube?
Yeah, it's live on YouTube at noon Eastern time. We also have the other places we post it. We post it on BitChute. We post it on Library. So if something does happen, you can still watch the show.
Okay. Well, we want to thank you very much again for joining us at 21 Wire Live. All the best.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for having me on.
Daniel McAdams from the Ron Paul Institute. Fantastic conversation. I mean, there's a number of segues there, jump off points on a number of other topics. We'd like to expand on those. Perhaps we'll do that this Sunday on the Sunday Wire at 21st Century Wire. You can listen live. That'll be going out live at, I believe, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. UK time. So join us at the Sunday Wire as well. And go to 21stcenturywire.com for more news, views, and analysis. Again, I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.